every time I draw like a diagram of neurons, if you noticed, I always like leave gaps. See, there's a gap, These neurons never touch one another. Now, this has to do with what? This has to do with the fact that your neurons are meant not to connect, because if they connect, then that would lead to what? That would lead to the impulse running in both directions. So just like a picture from your brain, you notice like every time you have neurons in your brain or anywhere in your body, there's always something like a gap. See that space here I have? This gap is what we call the synapse. And those synapses are essential because if the neurons, they're like wires, they touch, then you would find the impulse running in either way. And you don't want this to happen. So that's why we always end up with these synapses, or simply we call them like a junction. So again, how do you define a synapse? Synapse is a junction. It ensures that the impulse runs in one direction. So again, it's made up of two neurons, one neuron before the synapse, or I'm going to call the neuron before the synapse, I'm going to call that the presynapse. And the one after the synapse, I'm just going to simply call the post-synapse, right? One more time. Here's like a view of that synapse, right? Where I see that neuron here on the left, I'm going to call it presynaptic neuron, okay? Or it's before the synapse. And that one here, I'm going to call it post-synaptic neuron, okay? And my job now to show you how will the new impulse go from the first neuron to the next one. So let's take a look inside. As I get to the axon of the presynaptic neuron, what do I see? I see that there are some vesicles. Do you see that vesicle here? Vesicles just like a cell organelle with a membrane that contains some chemical. In my case, the chemical made here, that chemical that I see here, we call it neurotransmitter. What's a neurotransmitter? Just like a chemical to transmit or to carry or to like move that impulse from the presynaptic neuron here to the postsynaptic neuron, right? So again, you see how these vesicles fuse their content, they eject like content like outside, and they move across the synapse. What am I going to call this movement here? This movement, we're simply going to call it diffusion, that those diffuse from one place to another, and they bind to the postsynaptic neuron, right? You notice that the postsynaptic neuron has some receptor to bind to those neurotransmitters. So one more time, always. Your presynaptic neuron comes with vesicles. Those vesicles release their content. What the name of the content, what the name of that chemical we have here, we call it neurotransmitter. Those neurotransmitters travel from the presynaptic to the postsynaptic by means of diffusion. They bind to some receptor here. That receptor is only found in the postsynaptic neuron, and that will generate an electric impulse. Okay, let's see this one more time. So again, what would be the very first event in like the synapse? First thing that happens is that the impulse arrives to the presynaptic neuron, right? See, that's the presynaptic neuron on top of your screen. And these are like what? Those packages. These are like vesicles. So those are the vesicles, right? That's the presynaptic. Well, presynaptic here. And the gap, you see that empty space here? That's the actual, we call it cleft or synaptic cleft, or just called like a gap between the two neurons. What will these vesicles do? They will fuse and release their content. What am I calling this content? Once again, that content here, we call it the neurotransmitter. Okay, that's a neurotransmitter. It's going to be released, and then it would diffuse, and then it binds here, right on the postsynaptic neuron. I got some receptors. They bind to it, and that will cause an impulse to start in the new neuron. So again, originally I had the impulse in the first presynaptic, but now the impulse is running in the postsynaptic neuron. Okay? So one more time, I have some electric impulse in the presynaptic, I have some vesicle here. It fuses with the membrane, releases the neurotransmitter. The neurotransmitter then diffuses here in that section and binds to the receptors, and that will cause the impulse now to run in the postsynaptic neuron, right? Is it clear? Let's try something. Let's try to match each one of those labels with a part of the synapse, okay? So I'm going to call that part here, and you guys need to tell me in the chat box what letter am I referring to. So again, my first label here is the vesicle. You need to tell me which label on the diagram is referring to any vesicle. Yeah, Abderham, what do you think?
A, going to condemn.
Yeah, I'm trying to label that vesicle now. So A is my mitochondria, right? And D is a vesicle, right? Now it's the receptor. So can you find where with the receptor B, which letter is the receptor? The receptor is shown here as F, right? Postsynaptic is always the neuron that comes after the synapse. So that would be what? That would be letter G, and the presynaptic is E. Finally, the gap thing here, known as the synaptic gut, right? Is it clear? Now, I want you to try something else. I want to try, what would be the correct order of events in terms of the diagrams. So take a look at the diagrams and try to figure out, what would be the correct order of events from those diagrams. And then we match them with the correct text. So how are these diagrams? How can you arrange these diagrams to be in their correct order? They are in the right order. Sorry. Yeah, they are in the right order. There's nothing to do here. But then I need to match them as they are. So neurotransmitter diffuses across synapse. This would be what? This would be letter Y, right? Okay. I have another one here. Neurotransmitter binds to receptor. That would be what? Which letter? The Z. Very good. And the last one here is going to be X. Okay. Now, can you try, just like what we did with the reflex, can you try to put those in their correct order? So again, we're trying to do what? Here we're going to try to find the correct events about the synapse. So try to send one message with the correct order of events. So look what I'm going to start with. I'm going to start with B, right? That's like before the synapse, right? B. And then I'm going to shift to vesicles, D. And following that, they will release their content, which is E. As they release their content, they will diffuse that neurotransmitter, right? The neurotransmitter binds, and there's a new impulse, right? So that's like the best order. Is it clear? All right. I want to try to figure out if these statements true or false. Let's try the first one. First one says CNS is composed of the brain and spinal cord. Is this correct or incorrect? Is it true or false? Now, it's pretty clear that the only parts of the central nervous system, when we took this, the very first part of this lesson, it was the brain and the spinal cord, right? So these two here is your central nervous system. So that's like definitely true. Okay. But what about the second one? It says sense organs, like eye, contain receptor cells. This should be what? This should be like true, right? Because a sense organ, what's the definition of a sense organ? A sense organ is like the part of the body that contains receptors, high number of receptors in one part of the body. Then we call that a sense organ. Okay, that's another true. Sensory neurons carries impulses from receptors to motor. So we're going from receptor to motor. This is not like sounding very correct, right? Because there should be some neuron in the middle. So it's going to be receptor, then relay, and after that, we will have the motor, right? So that's not true. Reflex actions are quick and ejected, right? Does that sound true or false? This is actually true, right? Because that's what a reflexive action is all about. Is about doing a quick action to protect you from any possible danger. Then they said the entire relay is inside the CNS. So the relay neuron is found all together inside their spinal cord or inside your brain. Again, it's true. Lastly, electrochemical signals flow across the nervous system, right? Can you think about the last one? Is this true or false, the last statement here? Now, electro stands for what? Electro stands for the impulse, right? Electro is the actual electrical impulse. What about the chemical parts? The chemical stands for what? Chemical stands for the neurotransmitter, right? So that's true, right? Therefore, it is true. Is there any question about these? So can you try yourselves this question? So tell me what you think is correct answer to this question. Great. The best overdose, the only correct answer here is going to be like this. It's going to be answer C. You know why? Because you're going to start with what? You're going to start with the vesicles. Where are the vesicles? Always found in the presynaptic. Then they go to the neurotransmitter being released. P, because of the diffusion. Finally, Q with the receptors. All right? Is that clear? This question is quite tricky, so read it well before you decide what you think is the correct answer. You try this. Again, read it well because it's a little bit tricky. Now, let's take a look. It says, which direction does the neurotransmitter passes? Okay, so where am I going to try it? I just need to find P to Q. P to Q is like what? P to Q is motor to relay, right? Motor to relay doesn't make sense, right? So again, you can't be going motor to relay. It should be relay to motor, right? So I'm just going to eliminate the first option. Then it says P2Q again, that's motor to sensory, still wrong, because again, it should be sensory to relay or relay to motor. Again, the only correct order is going to be sensory to relay to motor, right? Then C says what? Says Q to P, which again, still wrong, right? Because you can't be going motor to relay. The only correct option here is D, okay? Because it's like the correct sequence. That's the only correct sequence of events or correct sequence of neurons that we have in the nervous system, right? Does that make sense? All right. Let's try like a question about the reflex actions. Oh, sorry, what do you call it? The synapse. They said here, describe how impulses are transmitted across a synapse. So what am I going to start with? I'm going to say vesicles containing, do you know what we call that chemical here? It's written actually here in the question. So say vesicles containing the neurotransmitter move to the membrane. What do they do? They actually fuse with it, right? They fuse with the membrane. As they fuse with the membrane, they release some chemical. We call that chemical, we call neurotransmitter. And how does it cross the cleft, or how does it cross the synapse? It crosses it by means of diffusion. Neurotransmitter then binds to some receptors found in the postsynaptic neuron. And this causes what? This causes like a new impulse in the postsynaptic neuron, right? Is that clear? Next one says, suggest how structure of the synapse ensures that the impulse travels in one direction. So again, what am I supposed to write that is only found in the synaptic or presynaptic? And what am I supposed to find to be written in the post-synaptic? Can you figure out like what are these two words here in the presynaptic and the postsynaptic? So something unique you'd only find in the presynaptic, and something unique you'd only find in the post-synaptic. Could you please tell us? Yes.
And receptors.
Yeah. So vesicles in the presynaptic, good, and
Receptors.
Receptors. Very awesome. Great. So this will take us now to the part about the eye.